Christmas Eve at Piercrest, under the mistletoe. Someone kissed my father for far too long, and it wasn't his wife. Minutes later, when I hung my mother's glass ornament on the tree. My stepmother smiled for the relatives. Then she destroyed me with public humiliation and slander before having me thrown out. I left in silence, my hand closing around the recorder already running in my palm. That night, I began to rewrite my family's history. My name is Alice Marks, for most of the year. I am the 28-year-old director of operations at Northline Nexus. I build systems. I optimize supply chains that move millions of units across 3 continents. I manage cascading failures, high-stakes contracts, and teams of engineers twice my age. I live by logic, by data, and by the clean, cold mathematics of efficiency. My world is one of definitive outcomes. Then comes Christmas. Christmas means returning to Lakesend, a town that feels preserved in amber, and to Piercrest, the house that stands guard over it. This year, the drive felt heavier. The 2-lane highway winding past the frozen water was slick with a fresh coat of ice, and the air inside my leased sedan felt sterile against the suffocating nostalgia of the town's immaculate holiday decorations. Piercrest was visible from the last turn, a sprawling stone and glass monument to my father's success and my stepmother's ambition. It blazed with light, not the warm, chaotic glow of a family home, but the curated, architectural brilliance of a magazine spread. Every icicle light dripped from the gutters at a mathematically perfect interval. I parked, my breath fogging in the frigid air. Inside, the party was in full, suffocating swing. The air was thick with the scent of overpriced balsam candles and Tessa's signature perfume, a sharp floral that always smelled like a challenge. Tessa Vale, my stepmother, was holding court by the grand staircase. She was radiant, dressed in emerald green velvet that clung to her like a second skin. Her laugh was a bright, brittle sound designed to draw every eye and every phone was on her. "Oh, darling, you're just in time," she called out, her voice slicing through the polite murmur. She didn't move to hug me. She gestured. She was gesturing toward the enormous, cathedral-ceilinged great room, where my father, Victor Marks, stood looking trapped. Above him, suspended by a gaudy red ribbon from the central beam, was a cluster of mistletoe so large it looked weaponized. This was not a spontaneous holiday tradition. This was a staged event. "Victor, dearest, for the camera," Tessa cooed, gliding toward him. She grabbed the lapels of his cashmere blazer and pulled him under the greenery. The relatives, Aunt Clara, Uncle Neil, the assorted cousins whose names I always forgot, raised their phones, a small constellation of glowing screens. Tessa didn't just kiss him, she consumed him. It was a long, slow, cinematic performance, her hand sliding up his chest, her head tilted just so. It was a kiss designed to communicate ownership, a press release issued via lipstick. The phones flashed, the sound of digital shutters clicking in the quiet, and as if pulled by a string, 6 of those phones panned from the kiss to me, standing frozen by the doorway, watching. They were capturing the kiss, and then capturing my reaction to the kiss. Tessa's choreography was flawless. I felt the familiar heat rise in my throat, the acidic cocktail of shame and rage. I forced a smile that felt like cracking plaster and turned away. My father, when she finally released him, looked dazed, his eyes searching the room for anything but me. He found his phone in his pocket and pretended to check a vital message. I needed an anchor. I moved toward the tree. It was, like the rest of the house, a masterpiece of impersonal perfection, 18 feet of flawless Fraser fir, adorned in a rigid palette of silver, gold, and white. Not a single ornament looked like it had ever been touched by a human hand, except for one. I slipped my hand into my coat pocket and closed my fingers around the small, worn velvet box I'd brought from my apartment. I'd transferred it from my luggage the moment I arrived, a reflexive act of protection. I opened the lid. Inside, resting on faded satin, was a globe of delicate, hand-blown glass. It was imperfect, with a small bubble near the brass cap, and etched into its side in delicate script were 2 words, Elaine, 1999. My mother, her last Christmas. My hands were steady. I found a sturdy branch, slightly hidden by a cascade of metallic ribbon, and hung the ornament. The small, deep red globe looked suddenly defiant against Tessa's sterile backdrop. A single drop of real blood in a room of polished ice. It was a small act, a quiet claim that she was here, too, that I was here. I had exactly 4 seconds of peace before the atmosphere shifted. Oh, Alice, how nostalgic. Tessa was beside me, her smile fixed, her eyes arctic. She ran a perfectly manicured finger over the glass globe. So fragile. From your mother, wasn't it? She didn't wait for an answer. She feigned a look of profound, theatrical sympathy for the benefit of Aunt Clara, who was watching us over the rim of her wineglass. We must be so careful with these old things. They break so easily. And with that, she lifted the ornament from the branch. The small metal hook screeched faintly against the pine. Before I could react, she had slipped it into the deep pocket of her velvet robe. There, she said, patting her hip. Safe. We can't have the decor clashing, can we? It throws off the whole composition. The whispers started immediately, little social shivs from the assembled guests. Always has to make a point, that one. Just like Elaine, so dramatic. Why dig up the past? It just ruins the mood. I stood motionless, the velvet box still open in my hand. I felt the gaze of 30 people on me. I had become the disruption. I had brought an unauthorized memory into Tessa's curated world. My father was approaching, his face a mask of practiced neutrality. Alice, Tessa, is everything? He never finished the sentence. Tessa held up a hand, silencing him. Her smile widened, but it didn't reach her eyes. She was moving to the center of the room, taking the spotlight she had briefly ceded. Everyone, she called out, her voice bright and commanding. The room fell silent. Alice has just brought something to my attention, and I think it's a moment for all of us. She beckoned me forward. Come, Alice, stand here. It was not a request. It was a summons. I felt my feet move, woodenly, until I was standing beside her, trapped in the center of the living room, the massive, glittering tree at my back. Alice was just trying to hang this, Tessa said. She didn't take the ornament out. She just patted the pocket where it was hidden. A very old, very delicate piece, from before. She looked around at the relatives, her face a perfect mask of concerned matriarchy. I know it comes from a place of love, dear, but who gave you permission to hang broken things on my tree? The word hung in the air, Shin. A few people tittered, a nervous, ugly sound. My father shifted, his mouth opening and closing uselessly. He looked at his wife, then at me, and then at the floor. He said nothing. The cameras were out again, not flashing this time, but recording the silent, public execution of his daughter. It's not broken, I said, my voice barely a whisper. Isn't it? Tessa countered, her voice dropping, becoming intimate, conspiratorial. Alice, we've talked about this, about bringing instability into the home. It makes people uncomfortable. She took a step closer, close enough for me to smell the gin on her breath. Her smile was gone, replaced by something sharp and cold. In fact, she said, her voice rising just enough to carry, I think I know what this is really about. You're upset about this morning's family meeting, aren't you? I stared at her, confused. What meeting? Oh, Alice, she shook her head, a perfect pantomime of pity. Don't play games. We know you've been secretly recording us, recording private family discussions. The room gasped. This was a new, brilliant, and devastating lie. In this family, loyalty was currency, and privacy was power. The accusation was an atomic bomb. What? No, I would never. We know you're a technical person, Alice. Tessa cut me off, her voice hardening. We know what you do at that logistics company. You think we're stupid? You think you can just walk in here with your little gadgets and undermine this family? Create a security risk? She was projecting, but it was working. The relatives were looking at me now with open suspicion, with fear. I was no longer just the sad daughter of the first wife. I was a spy, a saboteur. That is not true, Tessa. Tell them, Dad. I turned to my father. He was staring at the ornament I had failed to hang. His face pale and drawn. He wouldn't look at me. He just shook his head, a tiny, defeated gesture. He didn't defend me. He didn't say a word. The blow was invisible, but it knocked all the air from my lungs. It was a perfect assassination. She hadn't laid a hand on me. She had just used the truth of my competence to build a lie of my betrayal. Tessa signaled to her son, my stepbrother, who was standing by the hall. He moved to the front door and opened it. A blast of Arctic air cut into the overheated room, smelling of ice and pine. I think, Tessa said, her voice now full of regretful authority, it's best if you leave, Alice. We can't have this disturbance, not on Christmas Eve. No one touched me. No one had to. I was politely escorted out by the sheer, crushing weight of 30 pairs of eyes. The silence was absolute as I walked past the mistletoe, past the staircase, and into the cold entryway. I picked up my coat, my keys. I didn't look back. The heavy oak door clicked shut behind me, cutting off the light, the warmth, and the sound of the party resuming. I stood on the frozen flagstone path, the icy wind tearing at my hair. My lungs burned. I slid my hand into my coat pocket, the one that held my phone, and my fingers brushed against the other device, the tiny, wafer-thin digital recorder I'd turned on in the car, a reflex from years of high-stakes corporate meetings where an exact word-for-word record was crucial. It was still running. My hand closed around it. I had left it on by accident, a simple operational oversight, but it had been running when I stood by the tree. It had been running when Tessa approached me, and it had been running when she'd stepped away to talk to her lawyer, who was lingering by the bar. I pulled it out. The red light was still blinking. I stopped the recording and rewound it, my fingers numb. I pressed it to my ear, shielding it from the wind. First, the sound of my own footsteps, the whispers of the crowd, Tessa's public voice. And then, just after she had taken the ornament, a new sound. She had muted her microphone for the relatives, turning her back for a moment. Her voice, low, urgent, and sharp, directed at the man by the bar. Need it finalized before the banks close on the 26th? Is the power of attorney done, or not? I stood there in the dark, the wind howling around the eaves of Piercrest, the house my mother had helped design. I unlocked my phone, the screen painfully bright in the darkness. I opened a new message, addressed to myself. I typed, "Start at 0041. Is the power of attorney finalized?" I hit send, then I got in my car, turned the engine, and drove away from the blazing lights of my father's house. The game had changed. She thought she had thrown out a broken, sentimental girl, but she had just armed an operations director, and this was a logistics problem I was going to solve. The tires hummed on the frozen asphalt. I drove for 10 minutes before I realized I had the heater off. My hands were numb on the steering wheel, clenched so tightly my knuckles ached. The night wasn't just cold, it was absolute. Piercrest vanished in my rearview mirror, its blazing, curated lights swallowed by the dark. The adrenaline from the confrontation evaporated, leaving something much older and heavier in its place, the quiet, familiar architecture of my childhood. Tessa hadn't invented that cruelty tonight. She had just perfected it for an audience. Living under Tessa's shadow was a masterclass in psychological subtlety. She arrived not with a bang, but with a clipboard and a focus group. She evaluated Piercrest the way I now evaluate a failing distribution center. She identified redundancies and bottlenecks: my mother's furniture, my mother's friends, me. My mother, Elaine, had been warmth and chaos. Our house had been filled with the scent of turpentine from her painting studio, and the sound of jazz records played too loud. When Tessa took over, The scent became ammonia and polish. The sound became the discreet tapping of her stilettos on the hardwood floors she'd had installed. Her reign was one of quiet directives and public affirmations. Her own son, Julian, was an asset to be highlighted. I remember her voice at a dinner party, bright and clear, announcing that Julian had made a remarkable breakthrough in global studies, which translated to a C+ on a geography quiz. The table applauded. My directives were delivered differently. They were notes left on the granite kitchen island. Alice, the pantry is inefficient, the labels are inconsistent. Re-alphabetize before dinner. Or, the patina on the guest bathroom fixtures is unacceptable. See to it. I was not her stepdaughter. I was her intern. So I retreated. I didn't grow up in the house. I grew up in the garage. It was detached, unheated, and smelled of motor oil and cold cement. It was where my father, in his previous life, had tinkered with old electronics. He left behind benches cluttered with vacuum tubes, wiring diagrams, and coffee cans full of resistors. While Tessa and Julian were staging photo ops in the living room, I was surrounded by the sharp, clean smell of solder and ozone. I taught myself to repair old shortwave radios. I found comfort in the immutable laws of physics. A circuit is either open or closed. It works, or it does not. It cannot lie. It cannot smile at you while it pockets your inheritance. Logic was my refuge. In the garage, I was not the disruption. I was the operator. The Christmas after my mother died, the first Tessa Christmas, was a blur of aggressive rebranding. Everything changed. The heavy, mismatched velvet stockings my mother had collected were replaced with thin, identical white felt. The chaotic, colorful tree, heavy with 2 decades of memories, became a monochromatic statement piece. Tessa did a clean sweep, a total brand refresh, she'd called it. She donated boxes of my mother's things to a charity she sat on the board of, a move the Lakesend local paper called heroic and healing. But she missed one thing. In the back of a storage closet, shoved behind a box marked MISC cables and adapters, she overlooked the small, worn velvet box, the ornament. Elaine, 1999. It was the only piece of my mother that survived the purge. It was an anomaly in Tessa's new system, a variable she hadn't accounted for, and every year I had performed my small, silent rebellion, hanging it on the back of the tree where she wouldn't see it, until tonight, I had been arrogant. I had put it on the front. I learned the primary rule of Tessa's world very early. The first time she organized the official family Christmas card photo. I was 10. I was standing next to my father, wearing a navy blue sweater my mother had knitted. Tessa stopped the photographer mid-shot. "Stop. Just stop," she sighed, a performance of artistic frustration. "Alice, darling, step out for this one." I froze. "Why?" She touched her temple. "The color composition is just wrong. That blue, it's pulling focus from the silver tones. It's disruptive." She smiled brightly at the photographer. "Let's try again, just the 4 of us." I stood by the fireplace, the wool of the sweater suddenly hot and scratching my skin. I watched them. Tessa, my father, Julian, and Tessa's daughter from her first marriage. They laughed. They posed. Julian, in a bright red sweater, a color far more disruptive than navy, was pulled to the front. I didn't cry. I processed the data. The invisible rule. You are not part of the picture. You are a utility. Useful people fix things behind the scenes. They do not belong in the frame. So I focused on being useful. I focused on getting out. I buried myself in physics textbooks and coding manuals. I didn't need their approval. I needed an exit velocity. The scholarship to the best engineering school in the country came. I packed 2 suitcases, mostly books and soldering tools, and I left. I didn't look back. My dorm room was small, cinderblock white, and smelled of dust and old coffee. It was quiet. It was logical. I remember one New Year's Eve, sophomore year. A blizzard had shut down the entire state. The campus was a ghost town. I was alone. I could hear other students shouting the countdown down the hall. 10, 9, 8. I was staring at a schematic for a recursive algorithm. The hum of my desktop, the only sound in the room. I felt no loneliness, just the clean, cold satisfaction of a problem solving itself. That focus paid off. My senior project, another blizzard, this one historic, it crippled the city's infrastructure. The regional hospital was running out of critical medical supplies, plasma, antibiotics, platelet bags. Their logistics system was down. The roads were a nightmare, and their trucks were stranded. My project was a dynamic routing algorithm. It wasn't theoretical. I stayed awake for 48 hours, feeding it real-time storm data from the Weather Service, emergency vehicle locations from the city dispatch, and the hospital's depleted inventory lists. My software built a new supply chain in 30 minutes. It found clear micro-routes the city's own system had missed. It prioritized shipments not by size, but by critical need. The trucks got through. A local reporter called it a Christmas miracle. I called it optimized pathfinding. Northline Nexus called me 2 days after graduation. They didn't care about my family name. They didn't care what color sweater I wore. They cared about my algorithm. In 3 years, I was running the department. In 5, I was director of operations. I built ClearTrack, our proprietary logistics platform. It analyzes 20,000 data points per second to predict and reroute shipment failures before they happen. I gave them an 18% reduction in weather-related delays in the first year alone. My voice now moves freight across oceans. My decisions reroute hundreds of millions of dollars in assets. At Northline, I am Director Marks. My memos are acted on. My systems are implemented. But at Piercrest, I am still the girl in the navy sweater. I am a guest. I am an unstable variable whose presence disrupts the color composition. Tessa knows this. She relies on it. That ornament, it wasn't just a memory of my mother. It was a data point that didn't fit Tessa's narrative. It was a promise to myself that I would, one day, restore it to its proper place on that tree. I had tried the direct route, the logical route. 2 years ago, I caught my father alone in his study, a rare moment. "Dad," I'd said, keeping my voice level. I was reviewing some old family papers. Elaine had her own shares in the Piercrest Holding Company. What happened to them after she died? He flinched. It was a small, almost invisible spasm in his jaw. He looked over his shoulder, a reflexive, haunted gesture, even though Tessa was out of the house. "Alice, it's complicated," he said, shuffling papers on his desk. "It's all handled. It's in the trust. Don't worry about it." "I'm not worried," I said. "I'm asking, I'd like to see her will." I'll read the will again," he promised, his eyes avoiding mine. "We'll sort it. I'll find it." He never did. The next week, his personal secretary, a woman named Martha, who had worked for him for 20 years and used to slip me peppermint candies, was retired. A new one started, a sleek, efficient young woman hired directly by Tessa. Tessa's help became absolute control. She managed his calendar. She sat in on his calls. Just to take notes, she simplified his life by resetting the passcodes to the main house safe, the one where he kept his most important documents. My father, the man who built an empire, was now an asset being managed. I pulled my car onto the gravel shoulder of the dark highway. The engine idled, its soft rumble the only sound. I looked at the small, dark recorder in my hand. "Is the power of attorney finalized?" Tessa's voice, captured in the digital hum, was sharp, clinical. She wasn't just stealing a memory anymore. She wasn't just securing her place in a Christmas photo. She was liquidating an estate. She had made a mistake. She had forgotten who I was. She thought she had thrown out the sentimental girl who cried in the garage. She forgot she had raised the woman who built the system that sees everything. And I was already analyzing the data. I didn't drive back to my apartment. I drove to a featureless motel off the interstate, a place that smelled of bleach and old carpets. It was an anonymous node in the system, a place to think. I plugged in my laptop, the small, red blinking light of the recorder sitting beside it like a warning beacon. I replayed the scene at the tree over and over, not the humiliation. That was just noise, a distraction variable. I focused on the asset, the ornament. A memory surfaced, sharp and clear, cutting through the exhaustion. I was 12. My mother, Elaine, was packing the Christmas decorations. She held up the red glass globe. "Feel this, Alice," she'd said, placing it in my small hand. It was heavy, far heavier than its size suggested. "It's different from the others. It holds more than just light." At the time, I thought she was being poetic. Now, I knew she was being precise. I pulled up the social media feeds from the party. My cousin, Sarah, had practically live-streamed the entire event. Her phone, I knew, was a flagship model with a high-resolution camera. I scrubbed through the videos, the mistletoe kiss, a performance for the crowd, the camera panning, predictably, to my face, then the confrontation. I froze the frame as Tessa's manicured fingers closed around the ornament. The angle was bad, the lighting worse, but as she lifted it, the overhead chandelier caught the brass cap, a flash of reflected light. I forwarded the link to Pax. Pax is my head of system security at Northline. He lives in a state of paranoid vigilance and is, without question, the most brilliant data analyst I know. It was now almost 1 a.m. on Christmas Day, but I knew he'd be awake, probably running threat drills on his own network for fun. He answered on the second ring, his voice a low growl. "This isn't a server-down call, is it, boss?" "Off the books. Pax, I need a visual data pull from a compressed social media video. I'm sending you the link and a timestamp. I need everything you can get from the object at that mark. Specifically, the brass cap." "Christmas, Alice?" "Christmas, Pax." I sent the file. The silence on the line was filled only by the rapid, almost silent clicking of his keyboard. 10 minutes passed. "Well," he said, his voice different, sharpened. "Your family parties are weird. The footage is compressed junk, but your cousin's phone has a stupidly good lens. It captured a high dynamic range. Even in the shadow, the reflection metadata on the glass is rich." My email chimed. He had sent me a single, enhanced still. He had stabilized the image, corrected the color, and magnified the reflection. "Look at the join," he said, "where the cap meets the glass." I zoomed in. It wasn't a solid, decorative piece of molded brass. It was machined. There was a hairline seam, almost invisible to the naked eye, running around its circumference, and on one side, a tiny, recessed indentation. "That's a micro-latch, Alice," Pax said. "That's not an ornament. That's a custom-fabricated container. It's designed to be opened. You're looking at a lock." The motel room suddenly felt very cold. It holds more than just light. My mother, the artist who loved jazz, also loved tinkering in the garage with my father. She understood circuits. She understood engineering. She had seen Tessa coming. "Pax, thank you. Scrub the request from your logs." "What logs?" he said, and hung up. The hypothesis formed, cold and hard and logical. Elaine had hidden something small, dense, and critical. A key, a document, a drive, and she had hidden it in the one sentimental object she knew Tessa would eventually try to destroy. Tessa didn't just have a trinket, she had the data. This was now a retrieval operation. The asset was at Piercrest. The facility was secure. The primary obstacle, Tessa, was hostile. I couldn't walk in the front door. I needed a blind spot. Tessa outsources. Anything she considers domestic labor is beneath her. The Christmas takedown at Piercrest is a massive 2-day operation. She always hires an outside team. On the morning of the 26th, I was at my laptop. I identified the company. Winter's Grace Designs, the most expensive and exclusive holiday decor firm in Lakesend. I made the call. "Tessa Vale's office calling," I said, my voice crisp, efficient, and bored. "I'm her new executive assistant. I'm coordinating the post-holiday archival schedule. I see you're booked for tomorrow. I need to add a specialist to your team. The owner, flustered at the direct call, agreed immediately. A specialist? Yes, a lighting technician. We're doing an inventory of the electrical load for next year's display. She will have full clearance and will arrive with your team. Her name is Maya. Maya is not a lighting technician. She's a freelance penetration tester I've used twice to audit Northline's physical security. She can bypass retina scanners and pressure plates. A suburban McMansion, even one with a keypad, was child's play. The next day, December 27th, I sat in the motel room, a live comms link open in my ear. Maya was in. "I'm on the team. Alice, we're cataloging," her voice whispered, barely audible. "Hostile is confirmed off-site." Tessa had, predictably, posted a triumphant selfie from the Halcyon Spa. The geotag was active. A much-needed post-holiday detox. The spa's online booking system, which had a laughably weak firewall, confirmed her appointment. A 90-minute Himalayan salt scrub. The house was clear. "The asset is the ornament. Elaine, 1999, I said. Tessa pocketed it. She has a display cabinet in her private sitting room. Check there first. A minute of silence. Then, "I see it. Back row. But the cabinet's locked. Digital keypad. Looks new." "Send me a visual." My phone lit up with a high-res photo of the keypad. It was a standard 6-digit system, but the glass door of the cabinet was reflective. In it, I could see the blurry reflection of Maya's hand, and more importantly, the reflection of the keypad itself, showing faint smudge marks from a different angle. "The glass," I said. "Look at the smudges. What numbers are hit?" 1, 2, 4, 6, maybe a 9. I ran the permutations in my head. Tessa is arrogant. She is also sentimental, but only about herself. What's her significant date? Her anniversary? Her new anniversary, December 16th. "Try 121616, I said. A pause. Then, the soft, beautiful click of a magnetic lock disengaging. "I'm in," Maya breathed. "Asset acquired." "Good. Replace it with the dummy." I had spent the previous day sourcing a near-identical vintage glassblower's ornament, which I'd had messengered to Maya's hotel. "Wipe the pad. Get out with the team. Meet me at the extraction point." The extraction point was Studio Vitria, a high-end glass and art restoration workshop in the next town over. I'd booked the appointment under a shell company, requesting an urgent archival analysis. The owner was a quiet, elderly man who cared more about glass than about questions. Maya arrived, pulling the real ornament from a box of lighting cables. She placed it on the felt mat under the artisan's bright work lamp. "It is heavy," she noted, tapping the brass cap. "That's the point," I said. I turned to the artisan. "I need you to open this. The brass cap. It needs to be separated from the glass without breaking either." He studied the micro-latch through a jeweler's loupe. "This is not an ornament. It is a puzzle box." He nodded, unsurprised. "It will require the water saw to control the vibration." He mounted the ornament in a special clamp, submerged the cap in a shallow water bath, and brought a diamond wire saw, thinner than a human hair, up to the seam. The high-pitched whine was barely audible. He made the cut with surgical precision. 10 minutes later, he lifted the brass cap. It came free. Inside, nestled in a tiny, custom-cut piece of black, shock-absorbing foam, was a small, square object. It was wrapped in a piece of electric blue tin foil. I recognized it instantly. It was signal blocking, anti-static foil, the kind we use to transport compromised hard drives. My mother had built a Faraday cage into a Christmas ornament. My hands were not shaking, but I was aware of the effort it took to keep them steady. I unwrapped the foil. A single micro SD card. I slid it into the secure air-gapped laptop I had brought, the drive mounted, a single folder, inside, 4 files. 3 were audio files, labeled Audio.01, Audio.02, and Audio.03. 1 was a PDF. Peercrest Share Agreement. Final. PDF. I clicked it open. It was a scan of a 20-page legal document, a founding charter for the Piercrest Holdings Trust, signed by Victor Marks and Elaine Marks. A clause was highlighted in yellow. A note scrawled in the margin in my mother's familiar, elegant script. I clicked on the first audio file. My mother's voice filled the dusty workshop. It was clear, strong, and confident. Not the voice of a victim, the voice of a strategist. "Alice," she said, "if you are hearing this, it means I am gone. And if you are hearing this, it means you found it. I knew you would. You always knew how to look at the logic of a thing. Listen to me very carefully. Your father is a good man, but he is weak to flattery, and I am worried about the woman he has brought into our house. The ornament is the key. The document is the map. Now, let me tell you about the mistletoe clause." I sat in the sterile silence of the glass studio, the artisan discreetly moving to the front of his shop. Maya had already left. It was just me and the quiet hum of the air-gapped laptop. My mother's voice, captured years ago and stored in tinfoil, was echoing in my ears. "Don't let them rush you. Alice," the recording continued, "don't let them make you emotional. You are not emotional. You are precise. Now, look at the document. Section 4, subsection B." I scrolled down the scanned PDF of the Piercrest Holdings Trust. The legal language was dense, but the structure was logical. It was a standard co-founder agreement between my mother and father, designed to protect the assets, the house, the surrounding land, the investment portfolio, for the next generation, for me. "I call it the mistletoe clause," Elaine's voice said, a faint smile in her tone. "Your father thought it was festive. I thought it was necessary." I read Section 4, subsection B. The clause was an operational failsafe. It stipulated that primary administrative control of the trust, the power to move, sell, or leverage assets, was shared. In the event of one partner's death, control passed to the surviving partner, but, and it was a massive but, any redelegation of that primary control to a new third party, i.e., a new spouse, required two things: the signature of the surviving partner and the countersignature of the designated heir, me. Unless, it read, the heir was unavailable or unwilling. In that specific case, the surviving partner could act alone, but only after a waiting period. The date was specific. The redelegation could not be legally executed before December 26, 12:01 a.m., following the Christmas holiday. It was a cooling-off period, a mandatory 48-hour pause button built into the legal code of our family. My mother had anticipated a future holiday ambush. She had anticipated a moment of emotional vulnerability, of family unity, and she had installed a firewall. Any power of attorney, any document ceding control of the Piercrest Trust to Tessa Vale, signed by my father before December 26th, was legally void without my signature. I stared at the screen, the recording from my pocket on Christmas Eve. Tessa, her voice a knife. "Is the power of attorney finalized?" Her lawyer's muffled reply, and my own memory of her staging the mistletoe kiss. I clicked on the second audio file. It was short, a different voice, smooth and male. "Tessa, the execution is key. It must be signed on the 25th. It has to look harmonious. Hang the mistletoe. Take the photos. We need to establish an atmosphere of family unity on that specific date. If she contests, we paint her as disruptive, but the paper must be dated Christmas Day." It was her lawyer, coaching her, not just to get a signature, but to build a media narrative around it. The date wasn't arbitrary. It was the entire strategy. They knew about the clause, and they were trying to create a legal fiction that my father, in a moment of perfect holiday harmony, had signed over control. But Tessa was an operations manager, too, and she had the same problem I did. The holidays. The banks were closed. The county clerk's office was closed. She could get my father to sign a piece of paper on Christmas Day, but she couldn't file it. She couldn't get it officially time-stamped by a notary or a government system. So she would have to create her own date. I opened the third audio file. It was just 20 seconds of ambient sound, a high-pitched whine, a click, and the sound of a document sliding into a tray. It was the sound of a specific model of high-volume office printer scanner, the one in my father's study at Piercrest. I didn't have the document Tessa forced him to sign. Not yet, but I had the evidence of its creation, and I knew, with the certainty of a supply chain manager tracking a missing shipment, that Tessa would have printed that December 25th document on the first business day she could. I looked at the motel calendar. She'd been at the spa today, the 27th. She would have printed it this morning, before her detox. The document she would claim was signed on Christmas was watermarked, physically or digitally, with the printer's internal metadata from December 27th. She hadn't just faked a signature. She had backdated a federal document. That wasn't just a family dispute. That was fraud. My mother's final audio file played. Hire your own lawyer, Alice, not one of your father's. Someone he can't charm and she can't buy. Seal the evidence. Don't move until you have the high ground. I love you. Now, go to work. The recording clicked off. I packed the laptop. I didn't go back to my apartment. I drove 2 hours south to the city, to the offices of Cordaris and Sky. I wasn't hiring a family lawyer. I was hiring a corporate litigator. I needed someone who specialized in hostile takeovers. Nia Cordaris was exactly what I expected. Her office was glass and steel, overlooking the city from the 42nd floor. She wore no jewelry. She didn't offer me coffee. She just listened. I placed the air-gapped laptop on her polished concrete table. I have a hostile actor attempting to illegally seize control of a family trust through document fraud. I have root audio of the plan, originating from the opposing counsel, and I have evidence of a backdated power of attorney, printed this morning, which violates a mistletoe clause in the original trust charter. Nia watched me, her expression unreadable. I need 2 things, I continued. First, I need to digitally seal the evidence. I want a full chain timestamp on these files so they are immutable and admissible. Second, I need an emergency ex parte motion to temporarily freeze all assets and transactions associated with the Piercrest Holdings Trust, pending a full review of administrative authority. Nia finally spoke, her voice like dry ice. A mistletoe clause? A temporal failsafe in the bylaws. The hostile actor, my stepmother, attempted to circumvent it by faking a date. The asset, a printer, has the real date in its metadata. I need a forensics team to secure that printer before she realizes it's a witness. A very slow, thin smile touched Nia's lips. She staged a Christmas party to commit fraud. She staged a Christmas party to create a B-roll for the fraud, I corrected. She was building a public relations defense. Then we won't counter with a public relations offense, Nia said, picking up her phone. We'll counter with a quiet, devastating legal fact. She punched in a number. Get me forensics. I need a team in Lakesend in 1 hour. And get Judge Allister on the line. I'm filing for an emergency injunction. For the next 8 hours, we worked. Nia's team created a verified, time-stamped digital locker for the microSD card and its contents. The heritage story was crafted. We weren't a greedy daughter attacking a grieving widow. We were a daughter defending her mother's original, forward-thinking estate plan. We were protecting the family legacy from mismanagement. The language was precise, cold, and focused on stewardship, not scandal. The injunction was filed. A judge, woken in the middle of the night, agreed the evidence of premeditated fraud was compelling. He signed the order. As of 3 a.m., the Piercrest Trust was frozen. Tessa couldn't move a dollar. She couldn't sell the house. She couldn't leverage the shares. She was locked out. I finally drove to my city apartment. The sun was just starting to stain the sky a bruised purple. I hadn't slept in nearly 48 hours. As I put my key in the door, my phone vibrated. A blocked number. I answered. Silence. Just the sound of breathing, shallow and fast. Dad? I asked. A sharp intake of breath on the other end, then a whisper. Alice, she told me, you... He couldn't finish a sentence. He sounded terrified. I'm fine, Dad. She said you were unstable. She said, "The papers. It was just to protect." "Who told you to call me, Dad?" Silence. "Who is in the room with you?" A shuffling sound. The line went dead. He was a hostage. He was being controlled. His access to me filtered through her narrative. That call wasn't for him. It was for her, a loyalty test. He had failed it by calling, then failed me by hanging up. I slept for 4 hours. A cold, dreamless void. I woke up to an email. Not from Nia, not from my father. It was from Tessa's personal assistant. "Dear Alice," it read, "Tessa is deeply troubled by the misunderstanding on Christmas Eve. She believes there has been a terrible failure of communication. She requests the pleasure of your company for a reconciliation lunch. Tomorrow, 1 p.m., the Halberd Room. She is so looking forward to clearing the air." The Halberd Room, the oldest, most exclusive, most private club in the city. Dark wood, no cameras, and a membership roster that controlled half the state. A place where misunderstandings were buried over expensive whiskey. She was moving the battle to her home turf. She was going to handle me, to pat me on the head and tell me I was confused. She didn't know the injunction was already in place. She was walking into lunch blind. I replied, "I'll be there." I immediately called Nia. "She's requested a meet. The Halberd Room." "It's a black box," Nia said. "No phones, no recording devices allowed past the lobby. She'll try to get you to say something she can twist, and it will be your word against hers." "I know," I said. "But the room has windows. It's on the 3rd floor. It overlooks the old plaza." So, get your media forensics team, the ones who do lip-reading analysis from satellite footage. Book the top floor of the office building across the plaza. I want a high-powered lens on me for the entire meeting. I'm not bringing a recorder into the Halberd Room. I'm turning the building across the street into one." A beat of silence, then Nia's low, appreciative laugh. "You're not your mother's daughter, Alice. You're her system administrator. The Halberd Room is a place designed to absorb sound. The walls are paneled in heavy, dark walnut. The carpets are thick enough to swallow a footfall, and the lighting is kept low, as if illuminating secrets would be a breach of etiquette. It is the preferred neutral ground for the city's old guard to dissect one another with surgical politeness. The waiters move like shadows, refilling water glasses without a sound, their faces masks of perfect, servile discretion. They all, I noted, greeted Tessa by name. She was already seated at the best table, the one in the corner alcove by the tall, arched window. My lens. I thought, my team. She had chosen the perfect seat for surveillance. My father, Victor, sat to her left, looking diminished against the heavy oak. He stared into his water glass as if it held an oracle. Tessa's lawyer, Garrison, sat opposite him, his thin leather briefcase resting on the empty chair beside him. Tessa herself was radiant, dressed in a cream-colored cashmere suit. She was performing the role of the gracious, wounded matriarch. She rose as I approached, her hands outstretched, her smile a masterpiece of public relations. "Alice, darling, thank you for coming," she said, her voice warm and thick with practiced concern. "I am so glad we can finally clear the air. What happened on Christmas Eve? It was a terrible misunderstanding." I did not take her hands. I sat down opposite my father. I wanted him to look at me. He did not. "I know," Tessa continued, sitting and folding her hands on the white linen, "that you were upset about that silly ornament. In all the chaos, I'm afraid I must confess." She gave a small, self-deprecating laugh. "I think I may have accidentally thrown it out with the wrapping paper. I'm just devastated. A clumsy, terrible mistake." She was neutralizing the evidence, declaring the asset lost, destroyed, just a silly mistake. I said nothing. I reached into my coat pocket. My fingers closed around the smooth, cold glass. I pulled out the ornament, the hollowed, empty globe, the one my mother had built, the one Maya had retrieved. I had reassembled the brass cap. It looked untouched. I placed it gently on the center of the table. The dark, polished walnut reflected the deep red glass. It sat there, small, defiant, and loaded. The effect was instantaneous. Garrison, the lawyer, froze, his eyes locked on the globe. Tessa's smile didn't falter, but it calcified. It became a rictus, a mask of enamel. But it was my father's reaction that I was watching. He had been reaching for his water glass. His hand stopped, hovering, trembling almost imperceptibly, 2 inches above the table. He stared at the ornament. He knew. He knew that if it was here, on this table, then I knew. The blood drained from his face. "So," Tessa said, her voice dropping, the false warmth evaporating, replaced by a cold, sharp edge. "This is what it is, not a misunderstanding, a shakedown." She pivoted, turning her gaze from me to my father, her expression shifting to one of profound, maternal pity. "Victor, darling, you see? This is what I was trying to protect you from." She turned back to me, her eyes like chips of ice. "I am trying to consolidate your father's assets, to protect his legacy, to protect this family from hostile actors and market volatility. And you, his own daughter, are attempting to attack him, to undermine him, to bleed him dry over a piece of glass." "I am not attacking my father," I said, my voice quiet, but it cut through the room's manufactured silence. "I am protecting my mother's legacy, specifically, the clause she wrote and the contract he signed." Garrison scoffed, finally moving. He snapped his briefcase open. "This is theater," he said, his voice slick. "Your mother's clause, as you call it, is irrelevant. We have your father's full current and legally binding authority. The power of attorney is ironclad." He slid a document across the table. It was bound in a heavy, formal blue backing. On the front page, the date was typed in bold. December 25th. Below it, my father's signature, looking shaky and thin. "Signed on Christmas Day," Garrison said, smiling. "In a moment of perfect family clarity, witnessed by 2 members of your own family." "It's a very good fake," I said, not touching the paper. Tessa laughed, a short, ugly sound. "Darling, just because you were thrown out doesn't mean you get to rewrite reality. Are you accusing us of forgery? That's a very serious, very unstable thing to say." "I am," I said. "The date is a lie. That document was created on December 27th. "You have no proof," Garrison snapped. "The printer you used has a metadata log. The ink is barely dry. The watermark is from the business stock paper tray, not the bonded stationery," I said. I leaned forward, my eyes on Tessa. "You don't need to take my word for it. Let's find out." I raised my hand, not for the waiter, but for the maitre d' who had been hovering near our alcove, drawn by the shift in energy. "Pardon me," I said, my voice polite. "Could you ask the club manager if he has a handheld ultraviolet light? The kind you use to check currency at the bar. We just need to verify a signature." The blood drained from Garrison's face. Tessa's eyes blazed. She knew what a UV light would show. It would show the fresh, non-oxidized ink. It would show the security fibers in the paper. All wrong. It was a bluff. But it was a perfect one, based on a certainty of their fraud. "Absolutely not," Tessa hissed, her voice low and venomous. "You will not make a scene here, you little fool." "Why not?" I asked, my voice still light, conversational. "If the document is real, what's the harm? Or, we can wait. We can have my forensics team do it in court. They're very, very thorough. They'll just subpoena the club's security footage to prove you refused the simple test." The air in the alcove was so cold it felt brittle. My father finally looked at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of terror and dawning comprehension. "Tessa, what is she talking about? What UV light?" "She's a child throwing a tantrum." "Victor!" Tessa snapped, her mask completely gone. "She is trying to destroy us." "She's right, isn't she?" my father whispered. "The date. You told me it was just a formality. You said we signed it on Christmas, but we didn't. It was yesterday." Before Tessa could respond, before she could reform her defense, My phone vibrated on the table. I had placed it there deliberately. Face up, a single text message from a number I didn't recognize. It was a photograph. I opened it. The photo was grainy, clearly taken from a distance, through a window. It showed Tessa. She was not at the spa yesterday. She was in a hotel lobby. She was shaking hands with two men in expensive suits, between them on a low glass table. I could see a set of architectural renderings. The distinctive curved logo on the plans was for Crest Cove, the undeveloped waterfront property that was the single most valuable asset in the entire trust. I recognized one of the men, Marcus Thorne, a developer known for buying heritage properties, gutting them, and building glass box condos. The timestamp on the photo was from yesterday, December 27th, the same day she printed the fraudulent power of attorney. I looked up from the phone. The final piece of the algorithm clicked into place. This wasn't just about controlling my father. It was about liquidating him. "You're not protecting his legacy," I said, my voice flat, devoid of all emotion. "You're selling it. You're not consolidating assets. You're stripping them. Crest Cove. You had to have his signature on that fraudulent document by yesterday, because your term sheet with Marcus Thorne expires on the 31st. You needed to prove you had the authority to sell." Victor made a small, choking sound. "Marcus Thorne? You promised me. Tessa, you promised me we would never sell the Cove. That was Elaine's. That was her favorite place." Tessa spat at me, her face a mask of pure, distilled rage. "You were nothing. You were a line item in a budget. I built this family. I saved your father from himself, and I will not be audited by the girl who belongs in the garage." She had said it. She had finally said it all. I stood up. The battle was over. To stay now would be to descend into a screaming match, a place where logic died and only volume mattered. I had what I needed. I had the confirmation of the fraud, courtesy of their panic. I had the motive, courtesy of an anonymous source. And I had the whole conversation, every word, every admission, every threat, being captured in high definition from a window across the plaza. I picked up the hollow glass ornament and slipped it back into my pocket. "Thank you for the reconciliation. Tessa," I said, "you've made your position perfectly clear." I turned and walked away. I heard her start to scream my name, a raw, ugly sound that the walnut-paneled walls could not absorb. I didn't stop. I walked through the hushed, stunned dining room, past the maitre d', and out into the cold, bright afternoon air. My phone rang. It was Nia. "We got it," she said. Her voice was electric. "We got all of it. The lip read is perfect." She confirmed the document was fraudulent by refusing the test. Her father corroborated the date. And you announcing the Marcus Thorne deal was a masterstroke. It's motive. It's premeditation. We have her. We can destroy her in court. I stood on the sidewalk, the city bustling around me, a world of clean, logical systems. "No," I said. "Not in court. Not yet." "Alice, what are you talking about? We won." "We won the legal battle," I said, looking up at the sky. "She'll just spin it. She'll tell the press I'm a greedy, vindictive daughter. She'll paint my father as a victim of my aggression. She'll lose the case but win the war. She chose her stage today. Now I need to choose mine." "What stage?" "The Northline Nexus Winter Light Gala," I said. "It's in 2 days. It's my gala. I built the entire AV system from the ground up." I hung up the phone. Tessa had tried to bury me in the dark. Quiet rooms of the old guard. She had tried to control the narrative, but she had forgotten one thing. I don't just work in logistics. I work in communications. At my gala, every camera, every microphone, every 30-foot-high LED screen, they all belong to me. The Northline Nexus. Winterlight Gala is my creation. On paper, it's our flagship philanthropic event, a night where we raise millions of dollars for medical logistics, funding drone delivery vaccine programs and emergency supply routes in disaster zones. It's a demonstration of our corporate conscience. But at its core, it's an operational showcase, and I am the architect. This year, I moved it to the Solstice Atrium. It's our newest building, a massive sphere of glass and steel. The entire inner surface is a single, continuous 360-degree high-definition screen. It's an immersive environment. You don't just watch a presentation, you are inside the data. The audio system isn't just speakers, it's 54 channels of beam-formed sound, capable of projecting a whisper to a single seat from 100 feet away. For the past 48 hours, it has been my digital courtroom. Nia's legal team worked with PACS, every piece of evidence, the audio from the ornament, the lip-reading forensic video from the halberd room, the metadata from the printer, the fraudulent December 25th document, the real Peercrest Trust Charter, was digitally watermarked, verified, and admissible. It was all loaded into the gala's main presentation queue, locked behind my private key. The guest list was the first weapon. I sent the invitations myself. To my father, Victor Marks, I sent a heavy cream-colored card, embossed with the Northline logo. I did not invite him as my father. The invitation was addressed to Mr. Victor Marks, co-founder of the Peercrest Holdings Trust. It was a reminder of who he was before her. It was an appeal to the man who had built an empire, not the man who was hiding in his wife's shadow. His RSVP, a single shaky yes, came via a public email, not his private one, which I knew she monitored, a small act of rebellion. Tessa, of course, was invited. She had to be, but she was also forced to come. The entire social register of Lakesend was on the guest list. Her friends, the ones who had watched her throw me out, would be there. The local press, who fawned over her philanthropic efforts, would be there. To decline would be to admit defeat. To decline would be to cede the stage. And Tessa Vale never, ever cedes a stage. By the main entrance, I had a table set up. It was small, elegant, and separate from the donor plaques. On it stood a simple, silver frame with a black and white photograph. It was my mother, Elaine, from the year she and my father launched the trust. She was in the garage, laughing, a soldering iron in her hand. The plaque beneath it didn't say "in loving memory." It said, "The Elaine Marks Scholarship for Women in Systems Engineering." It was not a memorial. It was a statement of intent, a living legacy. Nearby, a single, small spotlight was aimed at a velvet-draped pedestal. On it sat the hollowed glass ornament. It was connected, almost invisibly, to a capacitive sensor that PACS had built. It was no longer just a memory. It was an interface, a truth pathway, he called it. The moment I touched it, the system would execute. The screens would light up with the mistletoe clause. The speakers would play my mother's voice. I had also curated the rest of the guest list. I didn't just invite the wealthy and the powerful. I invited the forgotten. Aunt Clara, who Tessa had cut off for asking too many questions about the estate. Uncle Neil, who had been my father's original business partner before Tessa labeled him a negative influence and had him bought out for pennies on the dollar. The old neighbors, the ones who remembered Elaine, the ones who had watched my father change from a vibrant innovator into a pale, smiling hostage. I was not just seating a gala, I was seating a jury. The media was handled with the same precision. There were no flashy press releases. Nia's firm distributed a simple, elegant digital fact pack to a select list of serious financial journalists and legal reporters, embargoed until exactly 9 p.m. The moment the presentation was scheduled to begin, the pack contained no gossip, no scandal, no stepmother drama. It contained the verified trust document. It contained the fraudulent power of attorney. It contained the mistletoe clause. It was a cold, dry, factual account of attempted corporate fraud. I wasn't giving them a headline. I was giving them a case. The master of ceremonies for the evening, our head of communications, was given a revised script. He was a professional, and he understood nuance. He was instructed to speak at length about legacy and stewardship. He was to praise the foresight of the true keepers of a family's heritage, the ones who protect it for the next generation. He was never to mention Tessa's name. He was simply to make her presence next to that title a visible, awkward lie. A special item was added to the live auction. It was listed between a week-long stay at a private Swiss chalet and a vintage 1958 Roadster. Item number 3. The Piercrest Founders Table. It was the original, massive oak table from the Piercrest dining room, the one my mother had commissioned. The description read, "All proceeds from this foundational piece of lakes and history will be the inaugural donation to the Elaine Marks Scholarship Fund." I was auctioning off her furniture from under her. The message was clear. You no longer have stewardship. The atrium began to fill, the sound of polite conversation, the clinking of glasses. I stood on the operations balcony, overlooking the floor, a headset connecting me to Pax and the AV team. I watched the room. I was not a participant. I was the event controller. Aunt Clara and Uncle Neil arrived. They found each other near the bar, a quiet, stunned reunion of two people who had been in exile for a decade. They saw me on the balcony. They didn't wave. They just nodded. A grim, supportive acknowledgement. Then they arrived. Tessa was a vision in Arctic blue, a color designed to command attention. She swept into the room on my father's arm, her smile bright, her head high. She was performing. She was the gracious, supportive wife of the Trust's co-founder. She nodded at the reporters, touched the arm of a bank president. My father, in contrast, looked like a ghost. He was pale, his tuxedo hanging loosely on his frame. He moved with her, but he was not with her. His eyes were scanning the room, hunting for me, for an exit, for an answer. And then he saw it. He stopped, pulling Tessa to an awkward halt. He was staring at the small table, at the photograph of Elaine, laughing in the garage. Tessa, following his gaze, saw it at the same time. Her smile froze. This was not the weepy, sentimental, tragic first wife she had crafted in her narrative. This was a competitor, a vibrant, capable woman. "Victor!" she hissed, her voice low enough that only he could hear, her grip tightening on his arm. "Don't. Not here." But he pulled his arm free. It was a small movement, but for him, it was an earthquake. He walked to the table, leaving her standing alone in the middle of the atrium. He stood in front of the photograph. He looked at it for a full minute. The buzz of the crowd seemed to fade around him. He slowly, deliberately, reached up and took off his glasses, as if he needed to see her clearly, without any filter. He polished them on his handkerchief, his hand shaking. He didn't cry. He just stood there, his shoulders slumped, in a profound, terrible, and very public silence. He was, I realized, finally and completely seeing what he had lost, what he had given away. Tessa, recovering, glided to his side, her mask back in place. She put her hand on his back. "Dearest, people are watching," she murmured, a perfect portrait of concern. "I know," my father said, his voice rough. He put his glasses back on, and for the first time that night, he looked up, his eyes finding me on the balcony. He looked right at me, and he nodded. Once. It was permission. It was an apology. It was an abdication. A bell chimed, soft but clear, cutting through the murmur of the crowd. The gala was beginning. The house lights dimmed. The ambient sound of the crowd faded, replaced by a low, expectant orchestral note. The 360-degree screens, which had been showing a soft, abstract winter light pattern, faded to black. The entire massive room was plunged into darkness. A single, white, pin-sharp spotlight snapped on. It was not aimed at the stage. It was not aimed at the MC. It was aimed directly at the center of the room, at the small, velvet-draped pedestal. It illuminated the single, imperfect, hand-blown glass ornament. Elaine, 1999. The room held its breath. It was my move. I walked down from the operations balcony. The single spotlight followed me, a perfect circle of white in the immense dark. The clicking of my heels on the marble floor was the only sound in the atrium. 400 people. Silent. Watching. I didn't look at Tessa. I didn't look at my father. I looked at the small, red glass globe shining under the beam. I reached the pedestal. I stood beside it, close enough to feel the heat from the light. I let the silence stretch, letting it grow heavy, filling the space. When I spoke, my voice was low, but the beam-formed audio carried it to every ear, as if I were whispering to each of them personally. "A small thing," I said, "can hold a seat at a big table." I reached out and placed my fingertips on the cool, smooth glass of the ornament. The capacitive sensor registered the contact. The system executed. The darkness vanished. The 360-degree screens exploded into life, bathing the atrium in a clean, white light. The image was not a video. It was a document. The text was 50 feet high, crisp, black, and undeniable. At the top, a simple heading, Piercrest Holdings Trust, Charter Agreement. And below it, a single section, highlighted in pale gold. Section 4, Subsection B, the Mistletoe Clause. The text was simple, stripped of its densest legalese for clarity. All administrative control shall not be redelegated by the surviving partner to a third party. Prior to the date of December 26, 12:01 a.m., any such instrument executed before this date and time shall be considered void ab initio, unless countersigned by the designated heir. The room was filled with a sharp collective intake of breath. This was not family gossip. This was a contract. The bankers, the lawyers, the investors, they all understood. They were reading the bylaws of a hostile takeover. And then, my mother's voice. It didn't boom. It was projected, crisp and clear, from the speakers directly above the center table. "If they forget you," she said, her voice filled with the calm, rational confidence I remembered so well. "Let the law remember for you." Tessa made a sound, a strangled gasp. My father flinched as if he'd been struck. Hearing Elaine's voice, not as a memory, but as an active, present instruction, was a ghost he was not prepared for. The screen changed. It split. On the left side, the high-resolution scan of the original trust charter, recovered from the ornament, my mother's signature, Elaine Marks, clear and strong, my father's signature, Victor Marks, bold and confident, from a time before he was afraid. On the right side, a new document, the one Garrison had slid across the table at the Halberd Room, the power of attorney. At the top, the title, Delegation of Full Administrative Control. And at the bottom, the date, December 25th. The discrepancy hung in the air, a massive, silent contradiction. The entire room could see it. The charter on the left explicitly forbade what the document on the right claimed to have done. There were no accusations, no voiceover, just the data, a simple, brutal, side-by-side comparison. The whispers began. It wasn't the sound of shock. It was the sound of calculation. I heard the faint, rapid tapping of the financial reporters typing on their phones, the digital shutters of their cameras as they photographed the screens. The story was no longer about a family squabble. It was about document fraud. It was about a compromised trust. I turned my head, just slightly. My father was clutching the arms of his chair. His knuckles were white. He was staring at the two signatures, his own, side by side. The man he had been, and the man he had become. He was trapped between the woman he had loved and the woman he had allowed to consume him. His face was a mask of profound public shame. Tessa was staring at me, her eyes boring into mine from across the room. Her face was white with rage. I did not look at her. I looked at my father. I raised my voice, just enough to be clear, my own words cutting through my mother's lingering echo. "I am not attacking this family," I said, my gaze locked on his. "I am enforcing your signature, and I am enforcing hers." I was executing the original code. The master of ceremonies, right on cue, stepped into the light. His voice was warm, professional, and full of practiced enthusiasm. "A powerful reminder," he boomed, as if this were all part of the planned presentation. a reminder of the importance of legacy, of protecting the original intent of our great philanthropic founders. He jested. The screens changed again, now showing the logo for the new scholarship fund. And on that note, Northline Nexus is proud to announce that the Elaine Marks Scholarship for Women in Systems Engineering has received its inaugural seed funding, a foundational $1 million grant, transferred this afternoon, from the fully funded and legally verified Piercrest Holdings Trust. It was the final move, the proof of control. The trust was not just frozen, it was active, and I was the one directing the funds. A single person began to clap. It was Uncle Neil, then Aunt Clara. Then, the applause rolled through the room, warm, sustained, and decisive. It was not polite. It was a verdict. It was the sound of consensus. The room, the jury, was validating the transfer. They were validating me. The applause was too much for Tessa. The public adoration, the validation of Elaine's legacy, the humiliation of her plan being exposed, it broke her. "No!" she screamed. Her voice, raw and shrill, tore through the atrium, shattering the decorum. The applause guttered and died. Tessa stood up, her Arctic blue dress a beacon of rage. "This is a lie. It's fabricated. It's slander." She pointed a trembling finger at me. "She is a disturbed child. Those are fakes. Cut and paste. She's trying to steal from her own father. Security! Someone stop this!" The room was frozen in horrified silence. She was unraveling. "It's fabricated," she insisted, her voice cracking. "The audio, the documents, they're fake." Pax had been waiting for that cue. Before I could say a word, the main screen changed. The documents vanished, replaced by something cold, complex, and beautiful, a moving, branching visualization of a data chain. "The assets recovered from the data carrier," Pax's voice said, calm, neutral, and disembodied, coming from the atrium speakers, "were sealed upon extraction using an SHA-256 cryptographic hash." The screen showed the long, complex string of numbers and letters. That hash was timestamped and verified on a public blockchain ledger at 1403, December 27th. The screen zoomed in on a block, showing the public transaction ID. It was immutable, unchangeable. "The metadata from the Piercrest office printer," his voice continued, "and the forensic lip-read analysis from the Halberd room were subjected to the same verification protocol. The chain of custody is absolute. The data is not fabricated. The data is verified. The system is secure." It was the voice of pure, cold, inescapable logic, the voice of the machine telling her she had lost. Tessa stared at the screen, at the branching, complex code she could never, ever hope to understand. She looked at the reporters, who were now writing faster than ever. She looked at her friends, who were staring at her with a mixture of pity and raw hunger. She had become, in the space of 3 minutes, a social pariah. She didn't storm out. She didn't faint. She did something worse. She sat down. She just deflated. Her shoulders slumped, her head bowed. The public relations smile, her greatest weapon, had cracked and fallen away, leaving the desperate, defeated woman beneath. She had lost the stage, and she knew it. The blockchain visualization faded, replaced by the deep, neutral black of the screens. Tessa was a black hole in the center of the room, her silence and her collapsed posture drawing in all the light. The jury, the bankers, the lawyers, her friends, had rendered their verdict on the fact of the lie, but they didn't know why. I turned back to the pedestal. I wasn't finished. Part 1 was the what. Part 2 was the why. This was not a crime of passion. It was a crime of accounting. "The blockchain confirms the data is real," I said, my voice cutting into the silence. "But it doesn't show the motive. Pax, bring up the timeline. December 25th through the 27th. The 360-degree screens lit up again, this time with a clean, 3-column graphic. The first column was titled December 25th, It showed a still frame from my cousin's video. Tessa, pulling my father into that long, performative kiss under the mistletoe. Below it, an image of the fraudulent document he signed, dated that day. The second column, December 26th, a federal holiday, banks closed, county clerk's office closed, a red X marked the day. Below it, a new piece of evidence, a partial screenshot of an email, pulled from their server by Nia's team, from Tessa to her lawyer. Garrison, time-stamped 10:14 p.m. The text was simple. He's resisting the Cove sale. We have to move. I'll handle the harmony and get the signature. You handle the filing. Push it through. The third column, December 27th. This column was a flurry of activity. 9:05 a.m. A log entry from the Piercrest office printer. The file name, Victor Poyoe Final, Dec25.pdf, 10 o'clock a.m. A screenshot of Tessa's public social media post, the geotag, Halcyon Spa, her caption, a much-needed detox. 10:30 a.m. The screen changed. A new photograph, the one sent to me by the anonymous source. It was grainy, taken from a distance. It showed Tessa, not at the spa, but in the lobby of the Four Seasons Hotel. She was shaking hands with Marcus Thorne, the developer. On the table between them, architectural renderings, and a document, a term sheet, with the Piercrest Cove logo clearly visible. Tessa wasn't at the spa yesterday morning, I said. She was lying. She was across town, signing a term sheet to sell Piercrest Cove. The room stirred. Piercrest Cove was not just land. It was the crown jewel of the estate. It was my mother's legacy, untouched, undeveloped. The term sheet had a non-negotiable condition, I continued. The logic building, step by step. Tessa had to provide proof of her sole administrative control of the trust by December 31st, noon. She had a deadline. I paced slowly in front of the pedestal. This wasn't about protecting my father. This was about a margin call. She had over-leveraged herself on a private real estate deal, and she was using the Piercrest Trust as collateral. She needed to liquidate the Cove to cover her own debt. The screen changed again. The clip of the mistletoe kiss played, this time in slow motion. That long, cinematic, loving kiss. This is the heart of the fraud, I said. This kiss, this moment, it wasn't about love, it wasn't about family, it was a prop. It was manufactured evidence. It was a deliberate, staged performance to create a false narrative of family harmony, a narrative she and her lawyer planned to use in court when I, the disruptive daughter, eventually contested the signature. She needed to prove my father was happy and willing on December 25th, the day the document was illegally dated. Tessa's head snapped up. She found her voice, a low, venomous rasp. You don't know what you're talking about. I did it. I did it to save us. To save the finances. The trust. It was failing. She pointed a shaking finger at my father. He was mismanaging it. I was protecting him. I was protecting the legacy. It was her last move. The martyr. The savior. You were protecting the finances? I asked, my voice genuinely curious. Pax, bring up the cash flow analysis. Piercrest Trust versus Tessa Vale Holdings, LLC. The screen split. On the left, the Piercrest Trust's liquid assets. Healthy, stable, profitable. On the right, a shell corporation I'd had Nia unearth. Registered in Delaware. Its financials were a disaster. A sea of red. Except for 3 large wire transfers, marked as consulting fees, from the Piercrest Trust, 3 payments in the last 4 months, totaling over $2 million. You call it saving the finances, I said. The bank records call it embezzlement. You weren't protecting the trust. Tessa, you were gutting it. You were advancing your self-funds, without authorization, to cover your own losses. And when that wasn't enough, you decided to sell off the single most valuable asset my mother left behind. The room was absolutely still. The audience finally understood. This wasn't a family drama. This was a heist. It wasn't about emotion. It was about cold, hard, criminal fraud. I looked at my father. He was vibrating. His hands were gripping the chair so hard. I thought the wood might splinter. He was staring at the timeline. December 25th, the kiss, the lie. December 27th, the printer log, the spa, the real estate deal, the $2 million transfer. He was seeing, for the first time, the entire, intricate, logical system of his own destruction. He saw that he wasn't just a husband. He was a mark, and the woman he had given everything to was not his partner. She was a liquidator. I walked away from the pedestal, the spotlight following me, until I stood in the aisle, just a few feet from his table. I spoke softly, but the microphone on my lapel carried my voice. "I don't want you to lose anything else, Dad," I said, my voice dropping, losing its sharp, prosecutorial edge. "Not the cove, not the company, and not your dignity." He looked at me, his eyes wide, swimming with a shame so profound it was almost physical. "This is not a revenge," I said. "This is a restoration. This is the offer." The screens changed. The timeline, the bank records, the fraud, it all vanished, replaced by a single, clean, white slide, simple black text. The proposal. 1. Immediate and voluntary nullification of the voided power of attorney, dated December 25th. 2. A full, independent, third-party audit of all trust assets and transactions from the past 5 years. 3. A complete restructuring of the trust's administrative board. And below that, the conditions. 1. Victor Marks will accept the honorary title of Chairman Emeritus. 2. All advanced funds to Tessa Vale Holdings are to be returned to the trust within 30 days. 3. All negotiations with Marcus Thorne regarding the sale of Piercrest Cove are to cease immediately and permanently. I was offering him an out, a way to save his name, an honorary title. He would lose his power, but he would keep his legacy. He would be the co-founder who oversaw a restructuring, not the fool who was defrauded by his wife on a public stage. He read the terms. He looked at Tessa, who was staring at him, her face a mask of pleading, desperate rage. He looked at the screen. He looked at Aunt Clara, who was watching him with tears in her eyes. He turned his gaze back to me. He held my eyes, and for the first time since my mother died, he saw me. He saw his daughter, not the disruption, not the problem, the solution. He nodded. A single, short, sharp dip of his chin. It was done. A sound ripped from Tessa's throat. A laugh, a dry, terrible, cracking sound. She stood up, pulling herself to her full height. She looked at me, her eyes burning with a hatred that was almost pure. "He won't dare," she hissed, her voice loud enough for the first few tables to hear. "He'll never dare. He is nothing without me. He won't dare." My father stood up. He was unsteady. He looked frail. A man hollowed out by his own weakness. He looked at the woman he had chosen. The woman who had just called him nothing. He looked at me, the daughter he had abandoned. He didn't say a word to either of us. He walked past me. He walked past the front table. He walked up the 2 small steps onto the main stage, where the master of ceremonies had been standing, frozen. He went to the lectern. He reached out a shaking hand and took the microphone. The sound of his fingers fumbling with the switch echoed through the massive, silent atrium, a soft thump as it turned on. He cleared his throat. He looked out at the 400 people. He looked at his partners, his friends, his family. He looked at Tessa. "I dare," he said. The word dare hung in the atrium, absolute and final. My father's single, shaky declaration was a full system reset. The gala, my stage, was over. The aftermath was quiet, legal, and swift. Tessa did not go home with my father. She left with her lawyer, her face a rigid mask, her Arctic blue dress looking suddenly garish under the house lights. She didn't look at anyone, the press, smelling blood, swarmed. But Nia's team was already there, handing out the printed fact packs that confirmed the story with cold, dry data. There was no, he said, she said. There was only, the trust said. The next morning, the court affirmed the temporary injunction. The Piercrest Trust was officially, legally, and completely frozen, its assets now under the review of a court-appointed custodian. The judge, having reviewed the blockchain-verified evidence from the gala, fast-tracked the hearing. My father's first act of free will was a quiet one. He met me at a neutral bank vault. He didn't speak. He just walked to his safe deposit box, the one containing the original paper copies of all his founding documents, the ones Tessa had never been able to simplify. He unlocked it, placed the small metal key on the table in the private viewing room, and pushed it toward Nia. Then he turned and left the room, leaving the custodian to begin the audit. He had surrendered the physical keys to his kingdom, the first step in getting it back. The days that followed were a blur of legal proceedings, depositions, audits, shareholder notifications. The machine of justice, once engaged, was relentless, but I knew the legal victory was only one part of the system. The human component, the family, was still broken. I didn't want Piercrest. I didn't want the house, the land, or the power. I wanted what Tessa had tried to erase. I wanted the table. So, I sent out new invitations, not to a gala, not to a hearing, but to a dinner. I called it the Winter Table. I held it in a small, private section of the Solstice atrium, the massive screens now dark, the vast space feeling intimate. I didn't invite the bankers or the press. I invited the people who had been deliberately edited out of Tessa's family photo. Aunt Clara, Uncle Neil, my father's sister, who Tessa had alienated after a fight over my mother's jewelry, the neighbors who had known me since I was a child, the ones who used to bring us casseroles and were then told not to drop by unannounced. And I invited my father. The table was long, made of reclaimed wood, not polished walnut. There was no kids' table, a concept Tessa had enforced to segregate and diminish. There was just one table, for everyone, instead of engraved silver. I had hand-carved place cards made from maple, each one propped against a simple white linen napkin. There was a chair for my mother. It sat at the head of the table, not in a mournful, empty way, but in a place of honor. On it, I placed a single white lily. It was not a memorial for a ghost. It was a seat for a founder. There was also a chair for Tessa. It was placed halfway down the table, between two of the cousins she had always despised. The place card just said Tessa, and the chair was empty. I had sent her the invitation. She had, of course, not replied. But the empty chair was not an act of aggression. It was a data point. It was a quiet, visible reminder that her absence was her own choice. My father was the last to arrive. He stood in the doorway for a long moment, looking at the scene. This was not the loud, performative, curated family he had lived in for 15 years. This was the one he had abandoned. Aunt Clara, seeing him, walked over and, without a word, put her arm around him. He leaned into her, his shoulders shaking. Just once. We sat. The food was simple. Roasted chicken, root vegetables, fresh bread, the things my mother used to make, the things that smelled like home, not like a catering contract. For a while, the only sound was the clinking of silverware and the low murmur of people reintroducing themselves, finding the threads of relationships that had been forcibly cut. Then my father stood up. He held a wine glass, but his hand was steady. I don't know how to ask for forgiveness, he said, his voice quiet, raw. Because what I did, what I allowed, is not forgivable. He looked at Aunt Clara. I let her push you out. Clara, you were my sister. He looked at Uncle Neil. I let her buy you out. Neil, we built our first company in your father's garage. He looked at all of them, his jury. She told me it was the price of a new life, of peace, that it was simplifying, modernizing, but it wasn't. It was an amputation. I let her cut away every piece of my life that reminded me of Elaine, that reminded me of myself, and that, his voice cracked, that included my own daughter. He didn't make excuses. He didn't blame Tessa's ambition or his own grief. He just stated the fact. He owned his catastrophic failure. I can't fix what I broke, he finished, his eyes finding mine. I can only stop being the man who broke it. I am so very, very sorry. He sat down. No one applauded. The admission was too raw, too painful for that. It was Aunt Clara who broke the silence. She raised her glass. To Elaine, she said, her voice thick, who was smarter than all of us, and who knew Alice would be, too. We drank. The knot of tension that had held the room dissolved, replaced by something warmer, something hesitant. In the center of the table, I had placed a small, silver-tipped Fraser fir. I took the glass ornament, my mother's key, from my bag. I tied a new silk ribbon to its cap, and I hung it on the very top branch, where it caught the low light, its red glass glowing like an ember. I remember that, Uncle Neil said, smiling, his eyes on the ornament. Elaine bought that at the first craft fair after they bought Piercrest. She said it was heavy with potential. Aunt Clara laughed, a real, genuine laugh. She said that about everything. Do you remember, Alice, the time she decided you were going to learn to solder? I smiled. I was 8. I thought I was going to burn the garage down. You almost did, Clara said, and the table laughed. Your mother! She had you in those giant welder's goggles, and she was showing you how to fix the circuit board on her old turntable. You were so serious, your tongue sticking out, and you did it. You fixed the connection. She turned to the table, and Elaine, she picks up the board, and she says, See? Anyone can burn a house down. The trick is to build something that lights it up. She was so proud of you, Alice. She always said you were the one who saw the systems, the one who saw how things really worked. I listened, and for the first time, I was hearing a story about my mother, not just a clause in a will. I was hearing about the woman, not the victim, the engineer, not the ghost. The table was full of these stories, and as they were told, the room filled up. The empty chairs didn't feel so empty. We were rebuilding the database of our family, one shared memory at a time. The mood was light, hopeful. It was the first real moment of peace I had felt since I'd driven into Lakesend. Then, my phone vibrated on the table. A text from an unknown number. I opened it. It was not from Nia. It was not from my father. It was from Tessa's new, very expensive, and very aggressive PR lawyer. The message was 5 words long. Tomorrow, 10 a.m., family meeting, Piercrest, Tessa requests. Tessa requests. Not her lawyer. She was re-engaging, but she was doing it on her turf, in her house, Piercrest. I looked up from the phone. The laughter at the table continued. Uncle Neil was telling a story about my father, but I couldn't hear him. I looked past the warm, bright table, out the massive glass wall of the atrium. A light snow had begun to fall, the flakes slow and delicate, melting as they touched the glass. They were beautiful, but they were cold. I breathed in, slow and deep. The legal battle was won. The financial battle was won. But Tessa knew, and I knew, that it had never really been about the money. It was about the house. It was about the name. It was about who got to sit at the head of the table. She had lost the gala. She had lost the trust. She had one last move, one last asset to leverage, the house itself, the place she had thrown me out of. I knew, with absolute certainty, that the final knot of this entire tangled system would have to be untied in the one room I had never felt welcome. The great room, under the mistletoe. Driving to Piercrest the next morning felt like a final systems check. The snow from the night before had dusted the great lawns, making the house look stark and cold against the white. I wasn't alone. Nia was with me, and in the car behind us, Aunt Clara and Uncle Neil. They were not just my family. They were my witnesses. The front door was opened by a housekeeper I didn't recognize. We were shown into the great room. It was cold. The massive 18-foot Christmas tree was still standing, its lights blazing with a kind of desperate, automated cheer. But the rest of the room felt hungover. The scent of pine and old champagne was stale, and under the mistletoe, where Tessa had staged her kiss, the antique Persian rug was gone. In its place was a sterile, modern, cream-colored replacement. She had already begun removing the evidence of the night, covering the very spot where she had stood. Tessa was there, seated on a silk sofa, looking impeccable in black. My father sat in a wingback chair near the cold fireplace, his hands steepled, staring at nothing, and beside Tessa, a new man. He was sharp, dressed in a devastatingly expensive suit, and had the placid, predatory smile of a public relations crisis manager. "Alice, thank you for coming," the new man said, rising. He didn't offer to shake my hand. "I'm Julian Croft. I've been brought in to recontextualize this unfortunate family misunderstanding." "It's not a misunderstanding," Nia said, setting her briefcase down. "It's documented fraud." Croft smiled, unfazed. "A word, a very rigid word. What Tessa sees is a family in pain. What I see is a media narrative that has spun out of control. Fake news, if you will, data taken out of context, private moments weaponized. It's ugly, and it helps no one, least of all, Victor." He gestured to my father, who flinched. "So," Croft continued, pacing slowly, "here is the solution. It is a media solution. We release a joint statement, the family, all of you, united. We state that the gala presentation was a misinterpretation of data, a theatrical, emotional moment by a daughter understandably protective of her mother's legacy. We announce that all documents, on both sides, have been reviewed, and the family is moving forward, together." He looked directly at me. "And for that to be believable, all copies of these documents must be verifiably destroyed. The original, the copies, the digital files. We burn it all. We create a clean slate. For the family, for the press, we give them a new, united story." He was proposing to erase the truth, to burn the evidence, to reset the system back to her control. I looked at Tessa. She was watching me, her eyes confident for the first time since the gala. This was her play. If I refused, I was the one destroying the united family. If I accepted, she won. I said nothing. I reached into my bag and took out a small, black, high-fidelity audio speaker. I placed it on the glass coffee table between us. "You want to burn the copies," I said. My mother had a different philosophy. I pressed play. My mother's voice filled the cold, silent room. It was the last fragment from the audio file, the one I had saved for this exact moment. Her voice was strong, clear, and full of an artist's certainty. "He will want to hide," she said. "He will want to burn the difficult things, to paint over the past. Don't let him. Don't choose to burn. Choose to show. The truth is not afraid of the light. It's the only thing that is." The audio clicked off. My father made a small, choking sound. He was staring at the speaker as if it were a living thing. "Elaine always did love her little projects," Tessa sneered, her composure cracking. "It's meaningless, a sentimental recording." "It's not meaningless," I said. "It's a directive. She knew you would try to control the narrative. She knew you would try to paint over the past." I stood up and walked, not to the tree, but to the wall beside the fireplace. On it hung a massive, oil-on-canvas portrait of Elaine. Tessa had commissioned it 5 years ago. It was technically perfect, but it was cold, lifeless. It made my mother look like a serene, passionless society wife. It was Tessa's version of her. "You commissioned this," I said. "A perfect, silent, acceptable version of her to hang in your house. But you didn't know the house as well as she did. You didn't know the system she built into it." "What are you talking about?" Tessa snapped. "She chose this wall for a reason," I said. I reached up to the row of antique light switches by the mantel. I didn't flip the main switch. I flipped the small, unlabeled one at the very end, the one that had always seemed broken. It wasn't broken. A low hum filled the room, and the overhead lights dimmed. A different light snapped on. A bar of cold, pure ultraviolet light hidden in the ceiling cornice above the painting. The painting changed. The serene, placid face of my mother remained, but across the canvas, embedded in the very paint itself, a new image glowed, a faint, intricate watermark, a legal stamp, a notary's seal, and a date. The same date and the same seal from the original. Verified Peercrest Trust document in the bank vault. My mother wasn't just an artist, I said, my voice quiet. She was an engineer. She painted this portrait herself, using a UV reactive pigment she mixed in the garage. She knew that one day you would try to replace her, so she built a verification key into her own image. You can't burn this, Tessa. You can't recontextualize it. She chose to show. Nia stood up. She placed a single bound document on the coffee table in front of my father. Victor, she said, her voice firm, this is the legal nullification of the fraudulent power of attorney. It restores the trust to its original charter. It accepts the terms of the restructuring. It acknowledges Alice as the acting administrator. It requires 2 family witnesses. Aunt Clara and Uncle Neil rose from their chairs and stood beside her. My father stared at the document. He looked at the glowing portrait of his first wife. He looked at Tessa, her face a mask of disbelief and pure, unadulterated hatred. He looked at me. He picked up the pen. "No!" Tessa shrieked, lunging forward. "Victor, don't! Don't you dare! After everything I did for you, I built this. I saved you." He flinched, the pen hovering. She saw his hesitation. She dropped her voice, her last, final weapon, the plea. She pointed at the painting, at me, at the document. "You choose it over me?" she whispered, her voice breaking. "All of this dead past, you choose her, over me?" My father looked at her, and the fear that had lived in his eyes for 15 years finally died. He saw her. He saw the lie, the performance, the desperate, hollow core. He looked at me, his daughter, the living, breathing truth. "Tessa," he said, his voice quiet, but it was his own. "I choose the truth, so I don't lose both." He bent his head, and he signed the paper. Aunt Clara signed. Uncle Neil signed. It was done. Julian Croft, the PR lawyer, stood up. He smoothed his suit. He looked at Tessa, not with sympathy, but with the cool assessment of a man cutting a bad asset from his portfolio. "My work here is done," he said. He snapped his thin briefcase shut, nodded to Nia, and walked out of the room. The heavy front door clicked shut. The sound was final. Tessa was alone. She was standing in the center of the room, on her new, cream-colored rug. She was directly under the mistletoe. The prop, the stage for her greatest performance, was now just a cluster of drying leaves, powerless, hanging in the silence. She looked at my father. She looked at me, and without a word, she turned and walked, not out the front door, but up the grand staircase, disappearing into the shadows of the house she no longer controlled. The room was quiet. My father was still sitting, his head in his hands. I walked to the tree, the massive, over-decorated, impersonal tree. I reached into my pocket and took out the small, red glass ornament. My hand was perfectly steady. I found a branch, not a hidden one in the back, the first, lowest, strongest branch, the one right at eye level. I hung the ornament, and it settled, the deep red catching the light. My father had looked up. He was watching me. "The table here," I said, my voice soft, "has always had enough chairs. The people who sit at it just have to choose." He stood up slowly. He walked over to me until he was standing beside me, shoulder to shoulder. We both looked at the ornament. It was small, but it was the center of the entire room. He put his hand on my shoulder. It was hesitant. Then it was firm. "I choose to sit next to you, Alice," he said. I leaned my head against his arm, just for a moment. Outside the great windows, the light snow continued to fall, soft and silent. Inside, the thousands of tiny generic lights on the massive tree hit the surface of the small, glass globe, and the ornament, my mother's key, my anchor, reflected them back, casting 1,000 tiny, sharp, beautiful spots of light all over the room. They danced on the walls, on the floor, on my father's face. No one could turn them off. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I'd love to know where in the world you're listening from. Please comment below so we can connect and share our thoughts. Be sure to subscribe to Lila Revenge Stories, like this video, and give us extra support by hitting that hype button so this story can be heard by even more people.